question for you. What's your advice for integrating compliance into your risk program?
I think if you're going to integrate compliance into your risk program, you should do a really good job of documenting your risk register so that you can show it to an auditor if you need to.
Ah, very good. Now, Norman, would you give me some bad advice on how to integrate compliance with your risk program?
I think taking your compliance requirements and typing it into your favorite generative AI engine to get advice, and then just copying that and pushing it out to the organization is the best way to do that from a bad
I
standpoint.
don't know how bad that is because we get a lot of things done quickly. It was actually, if you need to turn something around, it says, you're staying up all night to do this. You go, no, I'm not. You do that. But one up this one, Kim. Give me some
Uh,
worse advice.
I think you should take those outputs and assign them randomly in your risk register. So you should just put random assignments for each one.
That's excellent. Let's
Get
begin.
ready. It's Super Cyber Friday.
Welcome, everybody, to Super Cyber Friday. Today's topic is hacking the value of GRC. That'll be governance, risk, and compliance. An hour of critical thinking of how compliance can kickstart your risk program. So who do we have here? Well, you just met them moments ago. That would be Norman Hunt. He's the Deputy CISO over at Geico. And we have Kim Elias, who's a Senior Compliance Specialist over at Vanta. Our wonderful sponsor is none other than Vanta. There they are right there. And lots of different ways to participate. Let me explain the bad idea is how not to integrate compliance into your risk program, kind of like what we were just talking about. And for 10% better tips, it's how to improve your risk program with compliance. So this whole thing is going to be marrying compliance and risk together. So let's keep that all in mind. So bad ideas, good ideas, we want to hear them. We have joined us on question with Bring Me On. You can ask a question. Remember, let me remind you, the little question box in the upper right-hand corner, right there, you can ask a question at any time, and I will ask my guest. By the way, I always lean to my guests first before I lean on your questions first before I lean on my own questions. You can also vote for your favorite question as well. So here is our schedule right here. There it is, your good advice, bad advice, worse advice. We started with that. Then we have your bad ideas, your good ideas, and we'll play the the public interest, then the Department of Yes, last question advice, and then our meetup, which, sad to say, this Toucan platform, this is going to be one of the last times we use it. I think maybe second to last is today because they are shutting down. Join us in 2 weeks. Next week we are off. RSA is all next week, and we won't have any time to prepare for another show, so we're off next Friday. But the Friday after that is the Capture the CISO Finals. If you have not been listening to Capture the CISO, please go to our site, click the little blue icon for Capture the CISO. But if you click the icon at the bottom, you can register for the finals and see it. Our 3 finalists will be judged by 2 CISOs. It's going to be awesome. Rich Straffolino is going to be hosting that event as well. All right, that's enough of my nonsense. Let us begin our discussion here. And we are talking about compliance and risk as well. All right, so here's my first question. Are we currently having a problem? Let me ask you this, Norman. And my guess is this is not, but is risk an organizational concept? Like, is everyone on board with we're in business and we take risk and that's part of the thing? I mean, you work for an insurance company, so I'm assuming they're very familiar with the concept of risk. But does that actually go into their operating their business as well?
Yeah, I think if I just speak generally in conversations I have with colleagues and just people of all different organizations, it's easy to talk about risk when it's really obvious, but there's a lot of decisions, a lot of projects, a lot of just requirements and your goals that you're trying to achieve as a business that go into risk. And I think sometimes there's a loss of understanding that there's something more than, especially in my experience in the cybersecurity field, a lot of times people think of cybersecurity risk as that's what risk is, rather than all the other types of risk that exist
Tons of
that really have to be pulled together. Yep.
But more I'm trying to just make sure that everyone sort of is on board that it's an organizational concept and that my volume is low. I'm going to bring up my volume here. Oh yes, it is low. Here, I'm bringing it up. Do I sound better now? Yes.
You're louder.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. I just brought it up. Um, the but the idea is like you make decisions based on risk. Like the whole concept. Well, there's risk in that, but it's like no, there's risk, and we want to chance this, and we're going to take on this risk in
Sure.
terms of this opportunity. I mean, that is everyone's on board with that concept.
Yeah, I think so. And there's risk avoidance, there's risk acceptance, and then there's risk mitigation as different ways that you go
Right.
forward. And that's where those decisions are made on what you want to do and what your risk tolerance is.
And I'm sorry that I have to say this is such a ludicrously basic concept, but like if we can't accept that, like we can't even have this conversation at all. Like
Right.
that's going to be like we're all on board with risk. It's part of business. It's what we do. So you're smiling through all of this, Kim.
Yeah.
Do you find that not everybody's on board with that concept, or they are?
I think it's challenging because I think for a lot of people, risk seems like the executive sword to hold over employees' head, which is, oh, if you have a risk, that's a bad thing to our organization. And I think you're right, David, that it seems like a no-brainer concept. I think coming at it from a security point of view, of course, we want to know where the risks are. For other people in the organization, I think they worry a lot about putting risks in the light and actually spending time to find them. We know that that leads to transparency. It leads to a lot of visibility, which is good for the business. I think if you're not doing the right types of trainings with your employees, risk can be a very scary concept.
All right. So let me ask you a follow-up question. So I'm just looking at my own questions right
Yeah.
now, and we got more that have come in. But when maybe this is a concept question of when customers or let's say potential customers come to you,
Yeah.
when they're looking for a GRC solution, what are they taking into consideration that's specific to their organization? Like, do certain GRC solutions play better with certain organizations than others?
I'm going to be biased, but yes, I think ultimately that answer. I think there are standalone risk register tools. We've all seen them and experienced them. In my opinion, it works better when you have a risk register tool that incorporates your broader GRC program. So you're able to tie the controls that you have for your compliance frameworks to your actual risks, literally in the same tool. You're able to assign tasks, you're able to assign ownership, all within the same tool, so you have that visibility. I think a risk register that is truly just a stagnant document that lives in a tool somewhere is not really helpful in terms of pulling it into the bigger picture, which I do think is important.
Here's an interesting, good tip that came from Philip Miller. I'm throwing this at you, Norman. Don't focus on GRC until you establish with owners/officers what the policy aims of the organization are. Would that fall also on like what level of risk we're taking or not? I'll ask you that. But Philip goes on to say, from that policy, the GRC program can flow. Otherwise, you'll always be in an antagonistic position with the rest of the organization. That sounds right, very much the end of it. How much you agree or disagree with what Philip just said there?
Yeah, I think the only thing that strikes me on that is that I wouldn't maybe necessarily fully agree with is just the term policy. I become a little jaded with policy because I think, as you were mentioning, Kim, is it can become shelfware sometimes, and so it really has to be something living. I agree that it has to come from the top. Individuals, that are contributing to the missions, the mission of the organization, can't be responsible for understanding what the overall appetite is, for the organization and what their tolerance levels are. So it has to come from there. And I think Kim said something really interesting, important at the beginning, which was the organization has to have sort of this conversation that it needs to be part of projects. It needs to be part of things. Again, cybersecurity is a type of risk, but there's reputational, there's financial, there's the ability to make a decision, and go somewhere. Operational impacts, a lot of different things that go into it, and so it just has to be part of a conversation. So I agree, you have to have an executive engagement, but it can't be something that just the boardroom is concerned with. It has to be part and parcel of everything that you're doing, not to an extreme point where all you're talking about is risk, but that it's got to be considered the different types of risks when you're making decisions.
By the way, I want to call out Andrew Aiken's quote worse idea here. I don't think it's that awful, and I'm just suggesting this, Kim, as a user interface that Vanta may want to consider a sort of a compliance dating app where users swipe right on risk measures to match them to particular compliance features. I kind of like the idea of swiping left and right. No, I don't like it. Yes, I like it. How fast would people be able to essentially move through their compliance program. You just swipe back and forth. That sounds pretty awesome, actually.
I think there's actually a lot of potential there with that because when you say like what's a risk, you don't know where to start. This gives you a place to start where you can actually like think through what are the scenarios for your business. So yeah, there's something there. I'll submit it to product. Sure.
I also it would compel people to take really good photos of their risk too. You want to make those look good. Anyways, I'm not against this one, Andrew, at all. I kind of like this. We could have left this for Department of Yes, but I really like it. It's awesome. All right, so let me ask you this. I'm gonna start with you, Norman. Richard Stennon, he has a research company called IT Harvest, and he's been counting all the vendors out there in spaces. And I was shocked to see the ludicrous number of vendors in the GRC space. It's humongous. It's like insane. It's mind-numbing. So I'm assuming you've seen it and talked to tons of vendors. What are the sort of categories and differences you've seen in the space with all the GRC solutions out there?
If I had to put them into different categories, I think I'd probably put them into I've got something I've come up with and I'm trying to find people to sell it to. There's that category. I think I have something that's been around for a really, really long time and it hasn't really been updated and it doesn't seem current and meet the needs of organizations is another category. And then I think there's probably a sweet spot in between, which is we've got a solution that you can take your business requirements, you can take your objectives, you can take the way that you're organized, and the tool will help support that rather than saying you have to adjust to the way that the tool works or the solution works to help support what you're doing. So if I had three categories, and I don't know that that's unique for GRC tooling either, I think there's that those same three categories could be used across a lot of different things that I run into.
Okay, I would agree on that one. All right, I'm going to actually address that issue with you, Kim, after we play our first game. But I'm going to ask you this question first. How do you get stakeholders involved in a GRC program? And this kind of references what I think was it Philip Miller who brought this up? Yeah, in that good idea tip of like make sure you get all the owners, officers, what the policy aims are. But sometimes it's hard to identify the owners and officers. So how do you get people involved, I guess, to have that first part of the question to determine the policy, I guess?
Yeah. So I'll give the caveat that I think it varies a lot depending on your organization, depending on your structure, depending on your maturity. That I think is, take that with a grain of salt. But I do think there's this need to think of GRC as beyond your compliance team, beyond your security team. It is a cross-functional effort across your organization. Governance does not begin and end with the people who write the policies. It begins and ends with the people who are doing the policies, like the actual work that the policies are about. That's most of the time everybody at your organization. So I think having executive executive sponsors and executive stand-ins, to Norman point, is really important. You're not going to be able to have top to bottom organizational change unless you have executives buying into it. But I think also treating GRC as not just one organization, but truly talking to marketing, talking to sales, understanding like what their organizational impacts are and what policies impact them is huge. And you can apply that to risk specifically as well. You can't have security owning a risk if it's truly an engineering risk. If it's something to do with an outage, if it's something to do with your actual product itself, making sure that your engineering team is aware of that, I think goes pretty far.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Norman, GRC is just a lot of conversations, yes?
It can be, and if done well, you can make those conversations about the right thing. So I think I've seen situations where people are like, somebody from a GRC team, they're like, this is going to be a painful pill to swallow. And there are some who are excited to talk about, engage, and bring conversation together because they're bought into it. And I think what Kim mentioned about the doers, the people that are actually living and having to execute based on the policies, have feedback. And if you have an environment where you're not being told, in a more, in a autocratic, sense, what to do, and this is all you do, and it's really this feedback loop and what works, what doesn't work. are we okay with that level of risk or what's happening there, then I think you get more engagement in that type of situation. So I think it kind of depends on where you are. So I like to be in a case where we are happy to talk about risk and compliance and governance from that standpoint, but it can be painful if not done well, and there's just not engagement.
Let's play our first game.
Do you know what others are thinking? On the public interest.
All right, this is going to be pretty simple for you to follow, Norman, but it's tough to play, and the audience is going to play along as well. Here we go. We do searches on Google. These are not just specifically security professionals. Which of these three terms get the most searches? Governance, risk, or compliance? What do you think?
I would say it's probably C.
C, compliance. What do you think, Kim?
I'm going with risk. I'm going with B.
All right, and the correct answer is, so we got a C from Norman, a B from Kim, and the correct answer is?
Oh, nice.
It is C, compliance. All right. Norman's up 1-0. Norman, there's only 4 questions here. As I always say, getting 4 for 4 is extraordinarily difficult. Let's see if you can pull it off. ISMS or TPRM? What is ISMS? Excuse my ignorance. What does that stand for?
Information Security Management System.
Ah, there you go.
And then third-party risk management.
No.
I'm going to go with third-party risk management. I think is probably where I'll.
That's what I would think. By the way, I did not create this. Our great producer, Rich Straffolino, did. So I don't know the answers to these. What do you think, Kim?
I'm going to go with TPRM as well.
TPRM, 2 TPRMs. A lot of E's, but it looks split. Our crowd is going on both of them. Let's see what we got.
Oh, damn.
No. Oh, my God. A 5-to-1 difference. Look at that. Wow.
These must be global search rates then.
That's fair, actually.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It that was a shocker there. I think we all
those
right.
ISO 27001 people out there searching for ISMS.
All right. Policy, ethics, audit. Policy, ethics, or audit.
I think audit. I'm going to go with audit, H.
Yeah, I was originally leaning on audit, but just to keep things different, I'll go with policy, which would have been my number 2.
Really? Well, you're going to be hit yourself. You're up 1-0 right now. Let's see what it is. So you're going policy, Norman, and Kim is going audit. Let's see what happens. You're both wrong.
Wow.
It's ethics.
We're not doing well.
No, you're not doing well at all. Is anyone else doing well here? Although, I mean, I'm seeing a complete, like this last one, I got some mix of everything. Although we got a few G's. Keaton got a G, and John Holt got a G. Philip Miller got a G. There we go. All right, this is our last one. Business continuity planning, or DR. What
Business
do you think?
all day.
Business.
I'm going to do business as well.
That it seems generic enough a term that people would search it enough. Let's see. But would they just search the word business for what? For what planning? Although DR can also be doctor.
Could be.
Instead of disaster recovery, if that's possible, maybe it's that
probably
one.
a lot more doctors that they're searching there. What do you think? You still staying with business?
I'm going with business.
Me too. I'm going to stick with it.
All right.
Earlier.
Here we go.
Oh my gosh.
I was right. You should have listened to me.
There you go.
Wow.
They're probably doctors. Yep.
Kim, did you get one right? I don't think you
No,
got
I got them
one.
all
And
wrong.
Norman,
Thank
you
you,
got
David.
one right. That was close to. I think that might have been the worst. Have we ever gotten 0-0 for both guests? Because that might be the close to our worst performance ever. Sorry, those were tough. No, I don't want to slam you too much, but those were pretty darn tough. All right, so we're talking about a lot about compliance and risk. And by the way, I'm going to get to a very spicy comment that Jeff Reich made in a moment. But obviously, Vanta plays in this space. I want to give you just a moment right now, Kim, to explain specifically what you're doing in terms of helping teams sort of recognize their risk program through compliance. And then we got a buttload of questions coming in. So please give us a little lowdown there.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with Vanta, we truly see ourselves as a trust management platform that doesn't begin and end with any one specific part of GRC. It's really looking at the bigger picture. So we prove security through our automated tasks and continuous monitoring. And then we're also doing that in a way that you can show your customers, you can show your auditors, and you can show your internal stakeholders. So when you're managing risk, it's across the platform, not just in one area.
Ah, very, very nice. Well, guess what? We're gonna be talking about a lot more of this throughout the show. We've got a lot of more great advice from Kim and also from Norman, for that matter. But we're gonna put a poll in. If you would like a nice warm handoff, if you are looking to upgrade, improve your GRC program, whatever it is, and you would like a nice warm handoff to Kim and the GRC team over at Vanta, we have a poll. Did that poll just go up? Let me just make sure it's up. Poll is visible. I'll make it visible. Whoops. Oh, I think two of us were trying to do the same thing. Sorry about that, Aaron. My apologies. My sticky fingers. You can just fill out that poll. Click on the little bar chart, that little icon on the right, and you can answer yes. I need to know more. Of course, let's do this. So please, if you would like to have a nice warm handoff to the fine people over at Vanta, please go to that. All right, tons of questions have come in, and some people. Wait a second. David Klippel was putting his answers in there. Let me actually go to Mike Woods here, who asked this question. He's a CISO over at, I think, GE, I believe that's where Mike is. Any thoughts on risk exceptions versus POAMs? P-O-A-M-S? What does POAMs stand for? Do you know what that stands for?
Plan of action and management. It's what you do when you have a risk exception. Essentially, your plan and how you're going to manage the exception to a risk.
Okay. So, any thoughts on risk exceptions or POAMs? Is that how you pronounce them? In the light of embracing the red when it comes to KPIs, TTIs. I'll let you take this one for us, Norman. That's a really good question, actually. When you got risk exceptions and you're dealing with it. You see this question from Mike? Norman.
I lost your audio at the end, so I don't know if
Can
it's
you
on
hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yep.
Okay, let me repeat it. Any thoughts on risk exceptions versus POAMs in the light of embracing the red when it comes to KPIs, TTIs?
I think as long as you have the right visibility on risk exceptions, and you have you've established as an organization what level of risks can be accepted, and then your plan of actions in either case, they need to be reviewed by the appropriate level to make sure that we understand, or that the organization understands, how long it will take to mitigate the risk, and if there's any compensating controls that could be implemented in between, the time of the finding and where it's at. So I think from just a metric standpoint, as long as you've got the visibility and all the right processes in place, and then you only really need to measure on anything that's outside of either the approval or a plan that isn't acceptable, and then you have the right places in there. So that would be my initial take.
I mean, the whole concept of a risk register and risk exceptions is like, it's there, but how often do you see, Kim, like they make it and then there's like, it just kind of sits there and it doesn't do anything?
I think, unfortunately, when we're talking about GRC especially, people know like, oh, I do a compliance framework. I have to have a risk register. That's what I need to show my auditor. And they do it one time and they say, look, I have a risk register. Isn't that nice? I think you're exactly right, David, that in a mature organization, it evolves, right? You're looking at your risks, you're tracking your risks. It might even be a daily thing for you. So I think Mike's question, I think it's sometimes tempting to say, oh, we have a plan for this one. We have a plan for this one. We're going to mitigate this one. But it keeps getting pushed off because every time you might look at it, you're like, damn, we didn't do that plan that we said we were going to do, huh? I think truly thoughtfully thinking of your risks at the time, but also as consistently as you're hopefully able to look at your risk register, is more practical for your organization than making plans that you may or may never do. Just be thoughtful about what actually is the best for your next plan.
And let me ask you, that must be really tough because let me just say this. It's easy to say, I'll accept it, put it on the risk register, and then just forget about it. I mean,
sure,
that's going to be one of the most easiest and super easy skill anyone can pull off. But to go from that point to what we just talked about, having a plan to actually mitigate or deal with it or manage it or whatever it is, like that seems like a long road. Yes, Norman?
It can be. It depends on how difficult the issue is to fix. In some cases, things could be fixed in an hour's time if it's super easy. If it's an integrated legacy technology, let's say as an example, and there's not a way to comply with your policy, then those are things that may take a long time, and that's where the organization then has to decide how much effort is in there, how much risk is there, and then if the answer is the system is going to be retired in 6 months and it would take that long or longer to do it, then you may just put in other compensating controls to try to manage that through it. To me, risk and compliance and governance is all about just taking all that into perspective, getting the right level of visibility, so there are no surprises, and the appropriate level to sign off and on either the plan or accepting the risk that's there, and then just making sure that you're tracking it, so that if something was supposed to be done in say December of this year, when December of this year comes, you're there. If it's important enough and it's a high enough risk, that you've got the right milestones in place to check in, so you're not just waiting for the final date to find out that nothing's been done.
All right, I want to bring up something that I was teasing earlier. And by the way, I know my audio levels, I don't know what the heck's going on, are going up and down, but hopefully they're good right now. Again, I can bring them up. This is a comment that Jeff Wright put out, and he literally challenging our whole topic here. And he says, and he has it as a 10% better. This is not a bad idea. It's a 10% better. He says, don't start with compliance. Complete your risk program, and execution of that will feed your compliance. Stop doing it backward. All right, Kim, you're nodding your head like, yeah, I could take it or leave it. What do you think?
I think there's some truth in that, because I think at the very least it is easier, and I mean easier in that it is a quicker project to truly complete a risk register than it is a lot of times to complete a compliance framework. And I don't think you should check the box. I don't think you should just do a compliance framework just because. If you look thoughtfully at a risk register, I think that's a little bit more specific to your business, and it gives you a better idea of what truly you're worried about, what truly is important. So I think there is some value there. I think you can do both. I think in an ideal world, you would do both, but I think it's valid that your risks might be, putting those in the light might be more important for your organization than getting the certificate or the compliance achievement that you want.
Very good point. Norman, what do you think about this? Risk first,
I think Kim's last point is great. The only complications are if you're in a heavily regulated environment, and you have people checking. You don't have the luxury of saying, "I'll get to it when after I get to the risk portion done." But I do believe if you set up a good risk program, and the organization takes risk, and they've got a great mindset towards how they're thinking about it. A lot of times when you get to compliance, you will find that you are going to meet a lot of the things that are out there. They are, in most cases, while we can argue about this compliance framework or that one in this little detail of whether 3 years, 5 years, 2 years, or something is different, you'll be in the right ballpark to meet most of your compliance regulatory things if you've done that upfront work. If it was light risk work and it's sort of quick and dirty, if you will, then you likely are going to have a lot of work left ahead of you on compliance, and then you have to kind of maybe go back and redo some of that work that you did in compliance in the first place.
By the way, Craig Colley made a comment here of how many customers had COVID in the risk register in 2019. Probably a big fat zero. All right, let me also call out 2 10% better tips that Marivelle Alicia Gamlin made, and also Aman Sood. First, Marivelle's one. These are both, I'm going to say, before I read these, these sound like great tips. Does anyone actually do them? It's more my, all right, and I'll throw it up. Marivelle says, implement robust documentation and collect evidence to facilitate audits effectively and efficiently. That my comment to that 10% better tip is, yes, that's what we all should do. Yes, I agree. Yes, we should all do that. And Aman Sood said, run multiple audits at the same time. Really? To avoid duplication of effort for similar compliance regimes. All right. I will start with you, Kim. You're nodding to both of these. What do you think about these? Again, are these, yes, great advice, nobody does it, or great advice, yes, people do it?
I think people do both. I think yes to both. If I was to give a little bit more detail than that, I think in terms of documentation, that's going to make your life so much easier for any audit you ever do. Document everything and anything so you can easily show it to an auditor. I think it's better when you have automation, so you're not taking screenshots and putting them in a folder on your own. You're using a tool like Vanta, and it helps you get that easier. In terms of multiple audits, 100%. ISO 27001 and SOC 2, there's a ton of overlap there. I've been at many organizations where they do both at the same time, and the person who has to worry about that typically is your auditor, but you're going to show a lot of the same evidence for both controls across the board. So yeah.
What do you think, Norman? Is it aspirational, or do people actually do this? Again, running multiple audits and again, extensive documentation is, I'm assuming, what everyone should be doing.
Sure,
I mean, it's
and I
the
agree
job.
with Kim. The extensive documentation would make life great. The thing I found, at least in my years of living and interacting with humans, is that people are generally not great at documentation. And so I think your points on automation and making that process easy on the people that are doing it, because there are a few people sitting around going, I wish I could document some stuff right now. They're just going to do other things and other activities that they feel are going to lead to progress in another area that they can feel a little bit more tangible with it. So absent of people that do that for a profession, right, do documentation, that most people in my experience don't do that. So I think it's in some cases aspirational, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't try to strive to get there. Just make sure you don't expect people are going to sit down and put pen to paper, if you will, and do it that way. And then when it comes to multiple audits, I love that idea. There are so many audit frameworks, so many compliance, regulatory pieces that just overlap with each other. And if you can collect the evidence once and report on it multiple times, use many times, I think it's fantastic, and it's operationally less taxing on the organization to get asked. Somebody's not knocking on your door going, I'm here to talk about SOX. Then somebody's, I'm here to talk about PCI. I'm here to talk about pick your thing, and they're like, I feel like I just answered all these questions, and now I'm doing it again. So it's well received, I think, by all.
Yeah. By the way, I'm going to give kudos to Mauricio right here with his bad idea. Write a policy that says, quote, our business has a large risk appetite. We trust the good judgment of our employees, contractors, and vendors. What you hired people and you hired the contractors because you trust them. I don't see what's any problem with that. By the way, let's just say Mauricio's bad idea worked. You'd be out of a job, Kim. Vanta would be out of a job.
Yeah, I think if it was that simple, we would all be out of jobs. I think there are compliance requirements that say you need a little bit more than that sometimes for your risk register. So there's still going to be some people wanting more.
I think it's pretty good, though. I'm not against. All right, how far are we to that go? We're a few minutes away. We'll keep playing. Let's get into the automation issue. I'm going to start with you, Norman. Have you done any automation in GRC at all, or in compliance specifically?
Yes, so collection of evidence and doing things where you don't need someone to do it. So essentially collecting your line 2, if you're using the 3 lines model, evidence into a centralized repository. Doing some of that is great. You can script and automate a lot of that information to make it just more efficient. You can also write essentially your work papers and the evidence piece in the reports that would be anchored on the outputs that would come out as well. I've seen that work get done there, which are great ways to do it. Obviously, you got to have a lot of standardization. You got to have a lot of requirements of logs and things that make it repeatable. Because anything that's going to be automated needs to have a little bit of semblance of standardization there. But yes, I think it's an awesome opportunity to take mundane rote work that people just aren't really looking forward to do, and then automate that to pull it all together.
What are you automating these days? And let's start low to high. And what's easy to automate, Kim? What's difficult, but some are doing it?
Yeah, I think to Norman's point, documentation is something that if you can automate is great. If you have a tool that's taking screenshots or snapshots or something like that automatically based on your systems, based on your policies, that kind of thing. I think it gets a little bit harder when you're talking about third-party tools that have their own policies and procedures, and your compliance requirements might be to automate something within that. AWS, for example, you might have your WAF set up in a way that you know what it's doing, but the tricky part to automate it is to review it, or the tricky part might be to verify that it's doing what it says. So I think that's something that tools like Vanta, I think, are stepping into that domain, but that is more difficult.
Okay. Let's see what more questions we have. We got a few more minutes before this. Ron Werner asked this question. What's more effective, qualitative or quantitative risk analysis? How can organizations better use both, and where tips on prioritizing risks? So this is kind of a catch-all in this, but let's see if we can summarize this. You want to try to bite this one off, Norman?
Sure. I think my default answer would be whichever one you can get consistently into the conversation is the better one.
Oh, into the conversation. I like that.
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, risk is not something that that an individual person's doing off and then making all their decisions. But if you can't get and you don't have the data to get behind what would take quantitative risk analysis to be done consistently, then you use qualitative. But you have to still put it in business context and business terms. You still need to pick out your categories, but you're going to start talking about lows, mediums, and highs, which means you need common definitions around what those mean to folks, so that you don't spend time arguing about, I think that's medium, not a high, or whatever. And so spending some time building those out is great, but it can be a lot faster to do that than it is to come up with the actual mathematic calculations of risk if you don't have the data in the system behind it. The one that makes for super short conversations is quantitative, of course, if you can get there, but it does take a time. But I think, like Kim mentioned earlier in one of the examples, is maybe you take the quicker, faster one to make progress first, and then you can aspire if you can get there to quantitative later.
Kim, you want to answer this one as well?
Yeah, I think Norman said it incredibly well. I think quantitative tells a quicker, faster, better story a lot of times, but you have to be so wary that the numbers you're doing to represent likelihood, to represent residual risk, aren't out of nowhere. They aren't chosen arbitrarily. They aren't just using that. But truly, when you're starting to look at like what comes first for risk, I think quantitative data is like practically a number to like rely on. You look at what's highest, what's lowest, and you can look at it that way. Qualitative, I think, gives a bigger picture, like a better picture in a lot of ways, but it's less effective at communicating that to other people. So if you can trust your numbers, I think use your numbers, but always make sure that you have good qualitative to back it up too.
Very good. So here's an interesting question that Riguel asks, and I'm going to, he sort of amended it, just right there at the point. How will GRC program play out in the super complex world of AI, where the risks are still unknown or known, but there are no technical solutions available yet? Actually, an argument on that. In fact, we have an episode coming up on Microsoft Copilot, hacking Microsoft Copilot, but we'll have an actually answer to that very issue. And organizations have to comply to new regulations and acts like the EU AI Act. Well, that's another big one too. So I'll start with you. I'm sure this has come up in a few conversations with you, Kim. Yes?
Just a few.
Just a few.
Yeah.
How are you managing this?
Directly, I think ISO's trying, so we're trying along with them. ISO released 42001 as a standard specific to AI. They give guidelines, they give recommendations, and they give something that you can be audited on in your compliance with AI. I think a compliance framework like that is a really good like drop in the bucket that will be, you're right, the complex world of AI, but it gives you something to put your foot into, to write policies. Vanta has a framework based in that, so you can assess yourself against it and ultimately get audited on it. Auditors are just starting that wave of getting accredited so they can do it. I think there will be way more waves of compliance frameworks, and I don't think compliance frameworks are a save-all or a perfect solution, but that gives you an assessment of how you're doing with AI.
Norman, topic has come up ever, AI?
Yeah. Yes. There's a lot of conversation. I think all organizations are trying to understand.
Can I boil it down? Like it's coming. Let me ask, what do you understand? Let me say, like, this we feel confident about. Is there any aspect you feel confident you do understand what's going on?
Yeah, I think where you feel comfortable is when you control your data sources and you've got control over it. If you're using I'll say publicly consumable, machine learning platform that has generative AI on top of it, it's data security, data protection, right? There's intellectual property, there's private information, there's a lot of things that are concerns, and so if you can keep your data within your control, then that's a piece that is very knowable and controllable. Well, I think what organizations have to be mindful of is how reliant people are on their information. Because if you're going to use generative AI, not just to assist people, but to potentially provide answers, to customers, consumers, or constituents, or anything else, I think we've seen a lot of articles out there of how that goes bad sometimes, and things can happen, and so there's risk and liability potentially that goes into that, depending on what industry you're in, and your audience that you serve. So I think the how you use it and where you use it, how much you trust it, that's where having a risk framework around that is really important.
All right. I think it's time for us to take this call. It just came in.
Hello, welcome to the Department of Yes, where no request is ever rejected.
All right. We have a lot of really bad ideas here. And I'm going to start with this one, Kim.
Okay.
It comes from James Sperrenberg, and he says, don't create a GRC program at all. Just react when someone complains as accounting has figured out the cost of covering your butt is lower than the cost of actual continual compliance. This, by the way, I have an answer to this because I'm thinking about in my own personal life of this, but what say you on this one?
Yeah, I think that whenever we're talking about a program in an organization, it is always easiest to be able to put numbers and ROI on it. And if you want to get your accounting bought in, that's the best way to do it.
I will give you credit for that.
Thank you.
And let me caveat this one, and I'm going to ask for your answer, Norman, just a second. Actually, you know what? Before I say it, because I don't want you, this might be a good answer for you. So, Norman, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to just not do a GRC program and just take the cost of the hits as they come, and that your accounting department thinks is going to be lower than ongoing compliance?
Yeah, I think I've seen organizations that have a similar approach when it comes to cybersecurity as well. Of investment, of how much does it cost to really invest in a cybersecurity program, and what would your hits be? I think it depends on how much regulations you have. So if you were in a smaller organization that isn't heavily regulated, then there's opportunities where you could say, I'm just going to roll the dice and not spend the money and go from that.
Both of you very good on that. So what I was going to add is, I think about all the money that I've paid on insurance. And I will just say that I have definitely put more into the system than I've gotten out. And a lot out. And had we had the crystal ball be able to look into the future, would have been good to just never pay any insurance ever. Sorry about that, Norman.
No, it's okay. I think in many states there's an amount that you can put into a trust and be self-insured that way. It usually ends up being several hundreds of thousands of dollars. So if you've got that kind of money laying around and you want to put it into a trust that you could then be self-insured, there's opportunities for that. The problem is most people don't have that kind of money laying around to just leave in a trust, which is where they then leverage an insurance company to pick up that pool of risk and pay it out. And so, while as an individual driver, you may not feel like you're getting your fair share, you're in a pool that there's plenty of people getting in accidents and being injured that are pulling from that pool.
Yeah. All right, let me go to the next question here, or next comment here. This comes from Philip Miller. I'll start with you, Norman, on this. Rate your security program's maturity exclusively based on the quantity of items in the risk register. So if you've got a lot, then you don't have a great or I guess you do have a good security program because you got to cover all that. If you don't have many, then you got no risk, I guess. Or maybe the security program's already working. Who knows? What say you here?
Yeah, I think there you could come up with a system that would work that way. I think I would go with the direction personally, which is if you have a lot of risks identified, then it probably means you have a good detective security program in place. If you don't have much, then I'd be concerned that maybe you don't have a good detective system because organizations are going to have problems.
It's like the SOC that says, well, we haven't seen an alert in 2 months.
Right.
Whoops.
Yep.
Kim, why do you want to do this?
I think as we live in this changing, complex world where things like AI are changing things, we're always going to have new risks to consider. If you're not coming up with new risks every day, you're not seriously considering about the world that we're living in.
Very good point. Excellent, John. Oh, yeah! All right. So we have about 15 minutes left. Oh, I have not reminded people. The link at the bottom of the screen says the Capture the CISO Finals. Please do me a favor. Click on that link right now and register for the Capture the CISO Finals, which is going to be happening in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. No show next week. 2 weeks. It's going to be a ton of fun. You're really, really going to want to be there. Please click on that because that is going to disappear in about 10 minutes, that link. Although you can always go to our events page and find it there as always. And do not forget the poll that we have up for getting a nice warm handoff to the lovely Kim at Vanta and all the other lovely people who work at Vanta as well. Kim's not the only wonderful person that works there. We have talked to many of them, and they're fantastic. So if you like Kim, you're going to like them all as well. Make sure you go to the poll and select so we can give you a nice warm handoff as well. Philip, we got a nice credit from him. He says, you guys are good. Thank you very much, Philip. All right. And also stick around. We're going to have our meetup at the end of the show. If you've never come to our meetup, I'm talking to you specifically because there's a lot of people here that I know have not been to one of our meetups. I want you to come join our meetup, especially because it's on a platform that's going to disappear in 2 weeks, and you should experience this cool platform that you're not going to get to enjoy by the end of this month. Sadly, it turns off on May 31st. We have a show on May 31st, so we don't know if we can actually use it on May 31st or not. So with that being said, let me just ask you before I go on any further, because I have other questions to ask and whatnot. Kim, what have we not been talking about that we're like, oh my God, David, you haven't brought this up and we should be talking about this?
I don't think this is anyone's favorite topic, but I do think it's really important. How you do your risk register, how you do your risk is predicated a little bit in what industry you're in and what frameworks you're trying to comply with in compliance. So we're talking about like always track your risks and document. Those are great points. You need to look specifically sometimes at the framework you're trying to comply with and make sure that you're doing it in a way. SOC 2, pretty fluffy. Make sure you have a risk register. ISO 27001, a little bit more persnickety at how you're doing that. So risk is not always as simple as it sounds, is something I guess I would say.
I would assume in your industry, it is an issue, how you handle that risk register, Norman?
Yep, absolutely. Anything in financial services gets scrutinized pretty well.
I mean, you're kind of like, you and health are kind of on the top of the apex here on scrutiny, yes?
Yeah, we get regulated pretty well. There's
actually, does Geico sell health insurance? You guys don't sell
we sell it on behalf of others that you can get through, not health, I'm sorry, life would be it, but not actual health insurance, like hospitalization and stuff like that.
No, I didn't think so. So that would seem like a doozy, being insurance and health insurance, financial and health. How much more can you take? It's too much. So hold it. You've been at Geico a long time. Have you dealt with this in any other industries or no? It's been like you've been in finance or insurance all this time.
Yeah, no, almost 28 years and counting.
Do you get a record? Do you get sabbaticals or a record for making it that long?
Nope, you just keep showing up and keep trying to make a difference every day. That's about all you.
There you go. Let me ask the same question I asked for Kim just a second ago. Is there a topic that we have not approached here that you think, oh my God, David, why haven't you addressed this yet?
I think tangentially we talked about it, but I think it's really important of getting everybody involved. And I think the part that I would say maybe we've not touched on deeply is how do you go about doing that? So running around with a GRC flag is not going to get anybody excited, around an organization, whether it's remote as we tend to work now a lot, or in office. And so making GRC not about GRC, but about the way people work, about the way that what your business goals are, and putting it in language that makes sense for them, so it makes it real. Cybersecurity, in my view, is the same way. You can't just talk about technical cybersecurity things, or people get bored really quickly. So the one way to reach people is to make it a bit more about them and what they do, and how you might be able to help make their jobs a little bit easier through the lens of a GRC type effort there. So I think it's really important to meet people where they are, rather than saying, I've got this program and I'm going to drag you kicking and screaming into it and expect it to be successful that way.
I'm going to get to Gary Longsign's comment here, question, which is long. It goes much longer than what you can see right there. So I'm going to get through this quickly, and then I'm going to summarize it too. I've noticed that there seems to be a disconnect between assess risk and actions performed to mitigate the identified risk. Consider that the estimates vary widely, but everybody agrees that a great many security breaches result from password problems, weak passwords, stolen and cracked passwords, etc. Yet organizations seem to prefer to buy big, complex security solutions. I don't think they prefer to buy them, but that's the way I think they're sold to them, regardless. Rather than take simple steps to mitigate the biggest problems, like simple step might be MFA. Who knows? But I'm going to summarize. This is the only question I have right here from Gary. And its question is, how do we reconnect actions to risks? This is a really good thing. Like, this action creates this risk. Do you have these conversations, Kim?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question from Gary. I think there's a reason why we haven't solved that. And I think it's really hard to trace an action to one specific risk and to take one risk into one specific action that remediates it. I think you're right that a lot of times when we raise a risk, we talk about different ways we could mitigate that. And sometimes that seems more complicated than the issue itself. I can't speak for all organizations. I think sometimes it is more complicated. There's a reason why you can't impose the most simplest solution. I think to more directly answer your question, Gary, I would suggest that people try and break it down more than they do. Instead of saying passwords as a risk, actually break down what is a risk, what is the possible vulnerability there that could expose your organization, and see if that has a specific, more nuanced solution. I think more granularity allows you to see the pieces that could cause the bigger problem. But again, like, I think that's hard too when you're talking about an entire organization and not just like one specific issue. But that's my thoughts on it.
Norman, I'm assuming that the storytelling that you tell at your work is constantly discussing, when you do this, it creates more risk. You have that conversation a lot, I'm sure.
We do, and there's unintended consequences, for decisions, and that generally, to your point, David, it makes, can create other risks that you then have to say, what needs to be done with that. And so I feel like in probably the past 10 years or so, conversations, people are just moving quickly, and they're like, let's have this conversation quickly, and let's move on. And we've all read stories about the one-page memo and different ways of doing stuff, and it generally is speed through something, to do it. And unfortunately, sometimes things take a little bit of thinking and really thinking through what else could go wrong and what else can happen. And I think you need people that are sitting around thinking about that, and that does mean they need to understand the organization. They need to understand some of the processes and things that happen. When it comes to something like passwords, oftentimes if it's a small organization, you can implement things like MFA pretty quickly. But if it's a large organization with a lot of legacy systems and things that don't necessarily integrate with some of those, I can't call it newer technologies, but newer compared to maybe how old some legacy stuff is, solutions, it can take time. And that's where I think, Kim, you were talking a bit about almost segmenting the problem a bit and digging deeper into saying, well, let's go after the most high risk areas, and let's go, if we were picking on passwords, implement MFA there if possible. If not, what are the other compensating controls that we could put in place? Maybe there's a risk-based authentication or something else that could be implemented to help reduce that risk. And don't try to boil the ocean and hit everything in one big broad sweep, versus get to the most important things first and then work down the list. And that's where having a central risk register and having it granular enough that you can break these into chunks can be useful in that way.
Don't boil the ocean, I think, is the best idiom to explain like risk management that I can think of. Yeah, that's amazing.
And bring it in chunks. And by the way, and I'm going to get to this when I come back I'm going to wrap things up. But Clifford Ziarno said why BSOs are extremely valuable. I want to get to the topic of BSOs when we come back. But before I do, I want to remind everybody two things. One is our poll. If you'd like a nice, wonderful, warm handoff to our friendly people at Vanta, please select that poll as well. But also click the link at the bottom to make sure you do register for our not our Super Cyber Friday, our Capture the CISO Finals, which is going to happen during Super Cyber Finals in 2 weeks, or Super Cyber Friday. Sorry, mixing two F words up here. All right. Huge thanks to Kim's wonderful company, and that's Vanta, for sponsoring today's episode of Super Cyber Friday. Hey, starting in, let's say, 97 minutes from now, 3:30 p.m. Eastern, 12:30 p.m. Pacific, cybersecurity headlines, week in review. Phil Bayer, who is the former CISO over at Etsy. Phil is fantastic. We love having him on. That will be on our YouTube channel, CISO Series YouTube channel. So please stick around for that. Just go to that at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. Stick around for a meetup. Now you can change that link. Look at that. Super fast. Way to go, Aaron. Thank you very much. Please come and join us over on Toucan. It's going to be second, possibly third to last time we will ever meet there. So please enjoy it while you can. And if you've never been there, we want you there. Please join us as well. If you would like to sponsor Super Cyber Friday, just email us at info@cisoseries.com. Guess what? Our next available date is the middle of July. So we would like for you to participate as well. All right. I want to get to the subject of the BISO. And I will ask you, Kim. Kim, do you often engage with BISOs? And if you do you find it runs smoother when you're working with a BISO or not?
I think in my experience, a BISO is a newer term. So like a business information security officer, I don't see very often out in the industry. I don't. No, I think the concept is amazing. And the idea being, I think someone said it might have been Clifford, that tech people, I don't think talk business very well. I think that can be very, very true. I think having someone dedicated at a high level to think of security and business is very important. But yeah, no, me personally haven't seen it a lot.
Does Geico have a BISO, Norman?
No, we don't have formal BISOs separated out by business units that we use today. But I've seen the concept, and it depends on what you have. And I agree with Kim that in some cases, traditional technologists, and that's the way that they view the world, aren't great necessarily at integrating, if you will, or speaking in business and tech terms and being able to go back and forth. Which is a really important skill.
I don't always see it that way. I see a BISO really just taking a lot of work off of the CISO's plate is what I see. Like I see the CISO often doing the BISO job. They're doing that and other jobs, and that a BISO doesn't fully take away the CISO's responsibility to talk to the business, but they just take a lot of work off the plate, because especially if you've got a company that's got 23 different divisions, that's a lot of engagement.
Yeah, and I agree with you. That's essentially what can happen there, which is it's not necessarily about it's someone who understands what that business unit is doing and what their goals are specifically, and how to take. They're essentially an extension of the CISO organization, specifically embedded in. And I've seen it both ways, where it's either a person embedded in that organization or one that's part of the cybersecurity or CISO organization that's just an extension. But their job is really to translate any changes and saying, what does this look like here? They're integrated with project conversations, and they're there. There's a lot of great value in that. It's just it's tough to do and tough to fund. It's hard enough to staff cybersecurity specific people, and then also have a business slant to it as well, and keep that there. So I've seen organizations that do that and have those functions, and I've seen good and bad in it, and I think it has a lot to do with the person and how well they understand they can ride the line between both technical cybersecurity and the business side of things, and close that gap, as Kim said. Those that do that well, I think, are outstanding at that job, and probably viewed very valuable by their business unit.
All right. In closing, I'm going to give you each 30 seconds to wrap up any last thoughts you have. Kim, you seem you're ready to say something, but also please, if you want anybody to connect with you, or you're going to be at our meetup afterwards, so please chat with Kim over there. Any last things you want to say about Vanta or our topic?
Yeah, I would say about both. GRC, I consider it's 3 pillars all related to the same goal. I think they're all important. I don't think it's fair to say, one should get all of your focus. I think at different stages of your organization, you're going to have things that seem more important than things that'll get more of your time and attention. I think people who are wearing a compliance hat are going to hopefully be able to provide that transparency to the organization. I think tools like Vanta help. But yeah, that's my takeaway today, is I think transparency seems to be a key with all 3 of those.
Excellent. Norman, any last thoughts? And are you hiring, by the way?
Always hiring. So yes, we have plenty of positions that we're hiring in both leadership roles and in technical engineers in essentially every part of cybersecurity. What I would say is the takeaways for me is keep the conversation relevant to all the stakeholders that need to be at the table when you're talking about risk. Make sure people understand the whys behind when you have to do certain things, and be open to ideas. I think Kim said this really well earlier. The people that are doing the actual work, know what you're trying to accomplish from a compliance standpoint, but then be flexible in the ways that in which you can accomplish that then meet the needs of the people that do it, so that they are happy to give you feedback and tell you what's working, what's not working, and then adjust the program based on that. So I think those are the big things that I would ask everybody to do. And if we all do that better, then I think we'll have better outcomes.
All right, we are wrapping this whole show up. Everybody who's listening right now, what I want you to do is click that link at the bottom of the screen. Please click the link at the bottom of the screen. It's our last chances to be over at Toucan. Now, we're going to have another platform. We're probably going to be using Zoom, but let's take advantage of Toucan for the last few times that we have it. So click the bottom of the screen. Join us over at Toucan. Let's have a fun time at our after party. I want to thank our guest, Kim Elias, with Vanta, and Norman Hunt over at Geico. He's hiring, so if you are looking for a job over at Geico, Norman's an awesome person. He is competing in a jiu-jitsu tournament tomorrow, right, Norman?
Yeah,
is it
right.
tomorrow?
Yeah, tomorrow's.
Do not
Saturday. Yep.
mess with Norman. Or he'll show
May
you
the,
one
may
of
the fourth be
36
with you
ways
all.
He can take you down. Unless you're younger and stronger and more agile than Norman, then he doesn't want. Although the whole thing with jiu-jitsu is to taking people down that 3 times your size, right?
Yep, it's leverage.
All right. Everyone, thank you so much. Kim, Norman, Vanta, Aaron, take us out.